Hello and welcome to the Hacking State podcast. With me today is Nina Power. Nina, welcome to the show.
Hi, Alex.
Hello, and it's so good to have you and to speak with you again. Old-time listeners may know that Nina and I last spoke on my previous show, Agora Politics, where we were concerned with Ivan Illich and the sort of deschooling movement, and there was much more of a focus on that. But this time, actually, Nina, you are sort of the subject of this show in some ways. Although I would say kind of tertiary to the core issue, which is really about free speech and freedom of expression and its manifest forms. So, um, I guess to bring people up to speed who may not be totally familiar with your saga and recent developments on there, you were the I guess, subject of a long, um, more or less harassment campaign by a particular individual who then got involved with you as well as another DC Miller in a lawsuit with over defamation concerning his allegations towards you and your other litigant, as well as a countersuit on the part of of your interlocutor in that case, who was claiming also harassment. And so there was kind of this big mess. And the result of that suit has been thoroughly documented by sort of the winner of sorts of this case, or at least the I would say the primary antagonist. He's done a great job of making sure that the whole internet is aware. But I just want to sort of give you a chance to sort of maybe provide a brief synopsis for those who aren't maybe as familiar, and also just kind of your takeaway where you are now. It's been over for quite some time, so I'd like to know kind of
Yeah,
where you stand.
yeah, sure. I mean, the case actually finished last November, and the judge in the verdict said, oh, walk away. And we were more than happy to do that. Like we've been trying to walk away for 6 years, actually.
Yeah.
But we got locked into this counterclaim. Every attempt at mediation was rebuffed. We couldn't get out of it other than by admitting harassment and paying lots of money, which we weren't going to do because it wasn't true. And so we had to go to court basically. And I think this is something that maybe isn't clear because it's like we brought the case, but yeah, we kind of had to bring the case because there was no negotiation possible once we got locked in, and he was using extremely expensive lawyers.
Hmm.
Um, he spent more than £1 million in the end, we think.
Wow.
And we had lawyers working for us on a CFA, which is like a conditional no win, no fee. Um, and we gave them some money, but you know what I mean, it wasn't like an equal match. I think the point would be something like a point of principle, like the broader point is actually maybe not quite free speech, but really, um, what are the limits? Or I mean, let's say that the political scene or the social scene is so divided, and you've decided that these people are your enemies, right? So like the illiberal left or like the far left have kind of made enemy. They imagine everyone else as their enemy, right? So if
Hmm.
you're a gender critical woman, if you're a conservative, if you're whatever, like you're their enemy. Like
Hmm.
they're not necessarily our enemy or whatever, but they see the world in this very black and white way. And I think there's a kind of means end issue where they think, oh, the ends justify the means. So if you have decided that you hate someone and you want to ruin them, then you can say whatever you like about them. And that's just fair game, right? You can lie about people, you can make stuff up, you can exaggerate things, you can, you know what I mean, misrepresent. And there's a lot of this going on, right? Like it's kind of just dirty tactics, basically, like, seeing if you can destroy people.
Hmm.
Um, and we know that lies and gossip like spread like very easily because like human beings are kind of into drama, and and if they already dislike somebody because they have a view that you don't like, you're more willing, like cognitive bias, whatever, you're more willing to believe yet more bad stuff. So we were kind of um keen, if you like, to defend the principle that it's not okay to lie about people just because you've decided that you hate them. whether it's for psychological reasons or political reasons. And I think really a lot of what's happening is psychological need masquerading as politics,
Mm,
because everything has been presented to us as political, but actually we're motivated as human beings by other concerns, which are maybe often harder to talk about because they're really painful, right? So deep rooted things like envy. I mean, let's say you're kind of a loser and like you want a career in the art world and you can't get one, and you want to take it out on other people, but
mm.
you don't want to admit to yourself that that's what you're doing. So you dress it up as some like great righteous political project, like you're doing the world a favor because you're showing these evil people, these evil people exist, and you know what I mean? Like you've given yourself a little quest, and I think there's a lot of people on the let's say authoritarian left who have given themselves this little quest, and they sort of think of themselves as great anti-fascist warriors. And obviously the political horizon, the only thing that anyone can ever think of is like Hitler and the
Yeah, right.
Nazis, and so everybody ends up being Hitler, and that's it. Like it's incredibly stupid. And but I think that so we were trying to challenge that, basically say like, no, you can't just lie about people. You can't just make up that they've written articles. You can't just accuse them of death threats and so on and so forth. And we did get a mission of lying in court.
Mm,
The reason we both lost our claim, the reason why
right.
we lost our claim was on the basis of serious harm. And this is actually a kind of internet age issue. Because
Mm,
if you think about defamation in the era of the newspaper, like let's say a newspaper had published a single article about you that was falsely claiming something and it had a negative effect, it's very easy to point to that particular publication
yeah.
and go, this was the cause of me
Mm,
losing work or whatever. In the internet age, each tweet, for example, is treated as a publication, which makes it much harder to pinpoint causation. Like,
mm,
oh, especially when someone is creating like a miasma effect around you, like a kind of bad vibe, like,
yeah.
and using lots of different tactics and techniques like anonymous emails, anonymous open letters,
Mm,
as well as tweets and so on. So like a kind of campaign, harassment campaign. And we know that he was working with other people. Um, and because it's a civil case, you don't have like access to what everyone has. You can't just like say get the police to like go through their computer, right?
mm,
So a civil case depends upon people being honest with the material and saying like, here is some private chats, which is what we did, um to prove that we weren't planning to harass him. Of course, then he later uses the disclosure, which isn't online, and then, takes it out of context, and, he can't seem to walk away. Like this is what the judge was saying, like, walk away.
yeah,
Um,
right, right.
but whatever. And um, but yeah, but we know that he was involved in like a lot of the most defamatory stuff was by anonymous email, and he just didn't admit that it was him, and we
Mm,
couldn't prove it. So like the publications that we submitted were not really sufficient to prove serious harm, which is why we lost on that technicality, even though he did admit that he lied, for example, about claiming that Daniel had written an article defending Hitler, right? Like this
mm,
didn't exist. And he left his claim up for months. He claimed that there were death threats. He claimed like things that weren't true, right?
yeah. So, so,
Um,
so there's a big problem with kind of proving damages because of the technological innovations and the way that these harassment campaigns can get carried out. Um,
yeah, in the
Both
internet age,
because
so
they
yeah,
can get more decentralized and you can
yeah,
publish lots of little pricks and needles, but then you can also the anonymity component, I guess, would have been there in previous times. You know, there were
mm,
anonymous publishers of pamphlets and
mhm.
newspapers in the past, but I guess they would have been harder. Uh, or sorry, they'd be harder to hide, or sorry, harder to uncover today if someone really wanted to be careful.
Yeah, for sure. And like these are campaigns that like people spend a lot of time on, right? Like
Mhm.
these are people without jobs who've got a lot of money, they don't have to work. Like,
Yeah.
they've convinced themselves that they, like performing some service, like it's vitally important that we ruin this person's life because we've decided they're evil and we know they're evil. Not sure how, why, but and we're going to devote like months to doing this, like collecting dossiers. And then you end up with these like files, and there are lots of like online anonymous dossiers of like every single tweet that they could pretend was dodgy, or like I had a pseudonymous account that was not a secret, like,
Mhm.
which I clearly admitted was my account, and it was a research account for my book.
Mhm.
But he kind of pretended it was like some uh dark evil thing that I had set up for the explicit purpose of like harassing people. And it
Yeah.
just was not at all. Like I sent like two tweets saying like you're a liar, and then I deleted them immediately. Um but whatever. Uh so it's all about spin, and I think the authoritarian principle really is about controlling the narrative, right? Like it's who gets to tell the story,
Mm.
you know, and it's like it has to be what I think, and there's only one way of interpreting a sentence or a word, or
Yeah.
and it's my reading.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's so many. I apologize for making you, you've probably felt like you've had to repeat this ad infinitum for a long time now. But the case is actually quite interesting because of the myriad of sort of themes going on.
Mm-hmm.
There's this component of, you know, harassment, qualifying harassment, defamation on the internet, anonymity and pseudonymity. There's also this strange um, uh, sort of almost runaway kind of Girardian-esque obsession that this individual has with taking you guys out. I
Mm-hmm.
understand that you and DC Miller had your own reasons for not being able to sort of cede the case on his terms, but it is striking if you read through the materials, and I'll put a link to the court judgment for those who want to view it themselves. Um, how in depth this person is going and how long they persist in trying to do this. And it is like you said, where there is a kind of subclass of individuals who are otherwise kind of useless. And they seem to be doing these kinds of activities in order to give their lives meaning.
Mm-hmm.
I had a very, very tiny version of this myself where I posted an interview a while back with, I think, someone you could fairly claim is an anti-Semite, who just wouldn't deny it. He wouldn't also call himself that outright, but he also will not deny it if you ask him about it. That was Kevin McDonald. And, I was fine doing the interview, and I thought we did a good interview. And the interview was in a context of a debate about Jewish evolutionary strategy. And afterward, I discovered that there was this individual who had been tweeting about me, surreptitiously without actually like making sure to not actually tag me, um, and making claims that I was completely in support of everything Kevin McDonald was saying in this interview, and even attributing certain claims he was making to me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then I look at this account and I'm investigating them and seeing what they're about. And it's just a totally anonymous account. And they're doing this not only to me, but to a bunch of other random people. And it's like, wow, this individual, and it didn't have any effect on me. That interview was given a strike on YouTube and it was forcibly removed from my channel, but it didn't really affect me otherwise. Um, and it was like, wow, this individual feels like it's their mission in life to go and call things out on the internet and attack people. He was tagging my university, trying to tell them as if I'm still connected to them at all. And like,
Mm.
it was so ridiculous.
I think, yeah, there's a deeper question of like visions of the world, like the paranoiac vision, for example. And a lot of the authoritarian left tactics are about guilt by association,
Mhm.
right? And this happens in cancellation too. Like anyone who's associated with me will be targeted because they've worked with me, right? So people then get scared and then they pull back or whatever. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to isolate people, but they
Yeah.
also do it in by saying, like, so one of the arguments was, well, you tweeted with this dude, with your Twitter account, and this guy posted some stuff that we think is anti-Semitic, therefore you're tied by, one link to this. And I'm like, well, I'm not responsible for somebody else's posts, right? And I was
Mm.
interacting like for my book with like loads of people, and I interviewed like 100 people for my book, whatever, it's like the idea that somehow, I think because they didn't really have a case otherwise. It was like, because there was nothing, even though I published and spoken so much, there was nothing in anything that I'd said or written publicly that they could find that would prove that I was what he said
Mm.
I was, which is a violent anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was all they had, but we know that people use this guilt by association thing all the time because I think there is a model where they don't think that people are really individuals either.
Mm.
Like, I think the left are very bad at imagining that people have characters, and
Mm.
actually that people's views are much less set in stone as well.
Everyone's just an undifferentiated mass of their various phenotypic
Right.
expressions.
Right. And it's like, because we've decided that you are X, even though you're denying that you are X,
Mm.
it's like you presuppose what it is that you actually need to prove,
Yeah.
but you start with the axiom or the assumption, and then it's like we try to find anything we can. And Daniel makes this point in the trial where Daniel says, look, you just typed in whatever words I've used and put anti-Semitic next to it into Google, and then found whatever random page that has them on the same thing, and then gone, look, you used this word in this way,
Yeah.
right? Like, that was the only way you could have been using this word. I mean, it's just like ass backwards reasoning. It's not even reasoning. I mean, it's just a kind of really bad tactic, It's like, and I think a lot of this is actually about stupidity. I've been thinking a lot about stupidity and how people are kind of not only going along with very stupid claims that they know are
Mm.
stupid, but that people are becoming stupid by not standing up to clearly false claims. Like, so when this guy is claiming that I'm admitting things in a private chat when I'm making a joke. It's like, so he's pretending that there's no joke when I say, "Oh, I'm definitely a Nazi now, lol," right?
Yeah.
And he's saying this isn't a joke, like this is a confession, even though it's like got lol at the end, right? And I'm
Mm.
obviously joking with my friend about, from the standpoint of contemporary ideology, that's how I would be perceived, right?
Well, it was so interesting to me because I wanted to bring up this component of humor or like sarcasm.
Mm,
And it's one thing to take things out of context and then present them as direct quotes. It's another when it's like even cutting out all of the context, it's
yeah.
so obvious that this is a joke or that this is at the very least, and you talked about this in your Unheard interview a little bit, at the very least, a private conversation between two friends that was not meant as anything else. And I guess there are two cuts here. One is the cut on stupidity, which is just how either willfully stupid
Mm,
or bad faith the
mm,
interpretation of something like this is. And then the second is sort of like, from my view, it is just kind of tragic that um, that there is this kind of totalitarian ethos that says that even in your private life you can't be thinking these things, you can't be talking about having these conversations with uh with your intimates. And it it really is quite sad actually, because you know I think that you should be permitted to discuss vile, horrible things, even in a non-joking manner, in private.
mhm.
And how else are you going to address those issues anyway? Um, you're
Well,
just going to sit in with your solipsistic self and think about them. I mean, I guess I'm maybe, and I think you are the same. I'm just sort of hyper liberal in the sense of wanting to be able to explore lots of different ideas and
mhm.
ideologies and not really concerned about being poisoned via my proximity to them.
Right. I mean, do these people have no like robustness? I mean, we should be able to read and watch things and not like become those things. I mean, that's not how culture is transmitted. Like,
Yeah,
you don't read a book and then like take on all of its ideas and then you're that book. I mean, this is just stupid, as if we're not like critical beings. And you have to wonder whether like these people have a sense of humor or indeed any friendships whatsoever if they're pretending that this isn't like a funny conversation. And Daniel is a Jewish man. We often joke about Jewish things in a certain way, like from his prompting, and like our sense of humor is very dark and funny, and a lot of it is continuation from conversations that we're having in the real world, right? So
mm,
some of it just even makes sense, you know what I mean? Like we're joking about an orgy of blood because we constantly have a joke about piles of skulls, and like these are phrases that are like part of a friendship, but they're like references that are completely decontextualized if you don't understand that, and why should anyone understand like the nature of our friendship, right? it's
yeah.
it's a private thing. And I mean, there's something kind of obviously completely reprehensible and dishonorable about taking this chat and doing what he did. And I mean, it didn't occur to me that that's what he would do with the material. Like why would I like, we gave it in good faith to show that during this period, we were talking about, it was 200 pages of chat, by the way. Um, like we weren't discussing him. That was the point.
Mm.
And maybe that's like more upsetting than anything.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't
Well,
know.
this is to justify his claims in of his defamatory claims, right. Um,
But he had no access to the chat at the time he was making the claims, right?
right, right, right. So
So
go
there's
ahead.
no basis for the chat is only we only gave to the lawyers like as the trial approached to say we weren't we weren't harassing you. Like there
Mm,
was no collusion of harassment.
yeah.
Um and and then he's like retroactively pretending that this proved his claims that he made, back in 2018 or 19,
Mm,
which just can't possibly be the case, right? Like and in any case, nothing we say is like proves anything. You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like joke, like saying we should read Mein Kampf to understand it is not proof of anything. I mean, if I really was a neo-Nazi, I'd know Mein Kampf backwards, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the fact that I haven't even read it is like surely proof of like that I'm not whatever. And even if I,
Moreover, even if you had read it, who
right.
cares?
No, indeed, indeed. I
Yeah.
mean, I had the copy of the book from studying history A level. Like my
Mm,
teacher said, we should read it. Like it's not illegal to read Mein Kampf in the UK, right?
yeah.
We were studying the Third Reich. I mean, it's not, it's completely reasonable to try to understand, you know, these things, right? And I think everybody knows that. Like, this is what I mean about pretending. Like, yeah, like you say, bad faith. It's like people are acting in extreme bad faith because they want to say, no, this person really is reprehensible. So we're going to pretend that this is what we think she meant, even though
Mm,
they know it's not, right? And
yeah,
it's
yeah.
this kind of double, I don't know how to describe it. Oh yeah, bad faith is a good phrase, right?
Yes,
You know,
and I guess the to the result of this was that, when these private conversations were leaked, that's when you were sort of more or less put in a position to have to resign from your employer, your previous employer,
mhm.
Compact. Um, there was a lot of ambiguity around that resignation. I even tweeted something out like, "Oh, if this was not, if this was requested on behalf of, you know, the leadership of Compact, then that would be wrong." Um, But you know, in a sense, I guess the individual who leaked these chats did get what they wanted. They did end up, removing you from your post
Mhm.
and isolating you financially, professionally to an extent. Um,
Yeah. Although, seeing as he's also paid to make me bankrupt, as he was awarded some cost by the judge, he
mm.
also shot himself in the foot because now I have no income. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. So it's just a scorched earth out here.
I mean, it's just completely stupid. Yeah, I mean, I offered to resign and they didn't have to accept my resignation, of course. Well, I offered to step back and they accepted my resignation.
Why did you
But
feel the need to step back?
because I didn't want them to get, I didn't want their project to be, damaged in any way. And when there's a mob, when there's a kind of internet, like, I don't know, flurry, like it can seem, I mean, it's kind of nothing in a way. This is the weird thing about all this stuff. It's like it's not really real. Like it's real, but it's not. Like, it's like an internet flurry, like would die down in a week or something.
Mm,
You know, like and this bad faith thing. But I think people like get panicked and it's all this kind of fear thing. Like it stops people from stepping back and going like, hang on a minute, like she's clearly joking,
yeah.
like or whatever. Or like this doesn't matter. Or even if it was like this is the other thing. It's like no one's allowed to make a mistake. It's like this is crazy. Like this isn't how human life works. Like we all make mistakes. Like we
Yeah.
all
Well, the
yeah.
the sort of game theory around this, and again, why I kind
Mm,
of like to have these conversations is that you need people to stop defecting on one another. Is really what it is.
right.
And go ahead. Yeah.
No,
So
no, no. I mean, I agree with you. I don't really think in game theoretical terms. I think women are very bad at it, but I think just generalize horribly, but you're right in this. I would put it in the sense of saying if people don't stand up to the bullies, then they
mm,
win,
yeah,
right?
right.
So like what's going on there? Like I don't want to be governed by pathological, narcissistic, crazy people. Like
Yeah.
they should not be running anything.
Mm.
Like that's a terrible world,
And why are they harassing philosophers? Why are we?
Because they're
This is my
jealous. They're
objection. Yeah.
jealous. They're jealous.
Yeah. So we're just back to I've been reading The Republic recently uh I'm part of a reading group right now where we just went through the first five books of The Republic, and we're just back to where we've always been, which is, the city versus the philosopher.
Absolutely. No, I that's right. And yeah, I mean people can't leave philosophers alone. Like philosophers just want to be left alone.
Yeah. So with regard to sort of finding a solution to this,
Mm.
I'd send you my piece on
Mhm.
universal basic doxing. There's a follow-up piece to that called the Zero Knowledge Society. Um, I myself am a, a an engineer, and so my approach lately has been to sort of lean into technological solutions for what is what are largely technological problems. And I'm curious as to what you think about that, because in a way it's sort of defensive and it doesn't actually address the underlying problem. So for
Mm.
example, I'll just give you a brief synopsis of one of those solutions. For example, in the Zero Knowledge Society, I talk about kind of partitioning parts of your identity behind a mesh of like zero knowledge proofs, and using some of the ideas that Balaji Srinivasan has in his talk on the pseudonymous economy to kind of make it so that your public facing institutions like school, work, even hospitals and employers have very minimal identity information about you in terms of what you look like. Maybe even they don't even know your name in certain cases, or at least your full legal name. And the idea here is that using a mesh of zero knowledge proofs, you could sort of create a situation where it'd be very difficult for someone to cause sufficient damage via a dox to any part of your public facing identity, because those parts wouldn't all be as easily interconnected, and it would be hard um, to make a full on attack on your legal identity, because maybe, for example, maybe someone wants to go after something that you're tweeting, but you're not tweeting under your full name, and then they try to find your employer. Maybe they do find your employer, but your employer doesn't actually even know your full name. And then, and it was sort of written as a result of uh seeing that university students were getting were getting kicked out of their university for
Mhm.
protesting the war between Israel and Palestine. Now,
Mhm.
I'm actually partial to Israel, but I also thought that it was a problem that people on the right were claiming that this was that they could finally use the same tactics against the left that the left had been using on them for years to get rid of these Palestine protesters and expel them from school. And so my first instinct was to go towards a technological solution, but it really creates this kind of strange society where you're kind of just guarding your true identity all the time. And I'm just wondering what you think about that. I don't know if I've explained it quite well enough
Mhm.
here, but I worry that the technological solution is really like a way of escaping the much harder and much more difficult cultural solution.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'm from a technical point of view, like I wouldn't really be able to comment other than I imagine there would be vulnerabilities. I mean, like we're now in a period where like things like Signal, like I'm sure they're gonna make him hand over the codes, right? So even the most
Yeah.
encrypted things are gonna be broken, and like AI can just sweep everybody's chat, right? Or everybody's search engine or whatever search terms. But I mean, from the standpoint of the state, like if you're an employee, you're also like a tax subject, right? So they'd have to link it up somehow, right, behind the scenes, like who you were.
Yeah, the idea is so I can prove that you are who you say you are without actually telling them who you are. Um,
Okay.
so I talk about something like proof of person or proof of citizenship.
Hmm.
These are things that like you can prove technologically without actually giving out the underlying content, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm sure there are ways of doing it. I mean, I obviously defend anonymity and pseudonymity for all kinds of reasons. Like, I
Hmm.
mean, I had a pseudonymous account that was not private or secret or dodgy or mysterious, but simply like just an account I was using to follow men in the manosphere as research for my book.
Hmm.
Um, and it wasn't really anything like and um how do I put it? Like people who are whistleblowers. Like I follow a lot of people who work in industries or like gender clinics who would be fired if they tweeted under their own name, but they're telling other people what's going on. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I think like the whistleblower or the undercover person has to be protected in this way. Um, at the same time, is I think there are some people for whom like making oneself schizophrenic in that way would be like is quite impossible. Like I'm friends with lots of people, quite a few people I would say who I mean maybe suffer in the current climate, but from an inability to like tell the truth. Like they can't lie very well, for example. They can't dissemble, they can't say the mantras properly. And I really feel for people like this. I think they are like when you are in a society or a system that basically forces people to lie and tell untruths, you are actually like discriminating against people who are like unable to do that. And this is a form of, I don't know, a kind of person who is, I think, is punished really for that. And a lot of the time when people want to talk about things that are sort of taboo, like whether
Hmm.
it's HBD or sexual difference or whatever, like, reality of the world, like, and people are curious about particular things, and then sometimes people get like very into particular topics, and then it's like the only way people are uh, understood to be interested in those topics is negatively, as if like everyone who's interested in HBD must be motivated by some racist animus or something. And it's like, no, like and I don't want people to be punished for their like interests and obsessions or their inability to lie or to dissemble. And so in a sort of, I don't know, healthier, truth-loving society, there would be much more capacity to bear humor, divergence of research interests, and also like difficult truths. I mean, it
Mm.
is hard to live in the light of truth, which is why we have all kinds of ideologies. But the people who are basically gatekeeping, like, I don't know how to put it, they're people who are saying, no, you can't or you shouldn't be interested in these things. And we're telling you that
Yeah.
and if you are, then we're gonna like make your life impossible. Like, who are those people? I don't know. Like, who would be that person? I just don't get it.
Mm. Well, I mean, live not by lies, right? Like,
Right,
I I personally can't really do the mantras.
right,
So I've just selected myself out of every possible institution where that would be required.
right.
Um, but you do pay a cost. There's an economic cost, there's a professional cost, there's a social cost.
Yeah.
Um, it's just sort
But
of a decision about which costs you want to pay.
sure, and in a way you could say like I've paid like a lot of costs, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm bankrupt, I don't have a
more than
job,
anyone I know, for that matter. But
for a point of principle, which is like you shouldn't lie about people just because you don't like them.
yeah, yeah.
And
Um,
but in a way I'm happy I did that. Like I am also like paradoxically very free as a
mm,
human being, right? Because I don't have to censor myself in
yeah,
any situation, right? Ever now, because what does it matter? That doesn't mean I don't think about what I'm saying. It doesn't mean that I'm just like some Parisiastic, like babbling idiot, right? I
mm,
mean, maybe I am, but like it doesn't mean that I'm not thoughtful or careful, but it does mean that I don't have to engage in that kind of censorship, which I couldn't do anyway. Like I couldn't do it in 2018. I failed the loyalty oath or whatever around gender. Like I couldn't do it.
yeah. Well, there's
So,
something very powerful about a person who can't be bought. So,
right, exactly. Like the person with nothing to lose is a dangerous person and a
yeah,
powerful person.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, so given that you've kind of, I mean, I hope that it does come around to some kind of cultural change. I don't know how fast it will take, but the thing is that the miracle that was discovered, like the miracle of free speech as a norm in the West, was hard fought for hundreds of years for it to emerge um, out of the UK and out of the United States and the other English colonies. And it's very sad to me, the situation, particularly in the UK.
Mm.
It's almost like you guys are losing your ancient rights, basically, that you've helped secure for a lot of others. Um, and I'm curious if you think that the tide will turn, that people are finally getting kind of sick of it, this sort of authoritarian attitude that seems to have swept the the country.
I mean, it's global too, and I guess I maybe we were a bit optimistic, but then like you've got like X in Brazil, you've got like Starmer putting people in prison as the prosecutor general for like tweets and Facebook posts. Um, they just early released a lot of the violent prisoners today, so they can put the political prisoners in, just like the scene in Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, you have like Zuckerberg admitting that he was coerced into censoring Facebook, so like we know Tony Blair was wheeled out to say like we need to censor the internet. Like it's very obvious that there is this, it is moving at pace in that direction. The UK, but the UK, like legally, I mean, we didn't really secure our own rights. I mean, the freedom of worship point, that was, found America. was because of like restraint, restrictions in a way, or
Mm,
like, and we didn't give ourselves any amendments that dealt with guns or freedom from worship. So like we're still technically subject to the sovereign.
mm,
Um, we're still like feudal peasants. But yeah, I think, now we have a prosecutor general in charge, and like Kamala Harris is a prosecutor, right? And I think prosecutors see the world as like people who are in prison and people who are not yet in prison. Like that's how they understand
mm.
the
Right.
world, right? And
Yeah.
these are like very you do not want a prosecutor as your head of state.
Mm,
This is very bad. Like it's
yeah.
like having a hangman as your head of state, right? Like you don't want the executioner running your country. And um yeah, I mean, the kind of left authoritarianism of Starmer is particularly frightening because it is the the authoritarianism of bureaucracy itself. Like this man is nothing other than the system
Mm,
systematizing itself, right? Like he has no character, he has no taste, no preferences, like he doesn't have a favorite band, whatever. Like he's just not even really a character or a
mm.
person.
Yeah.
He
You have an
is,
NPC in there.
yeah, but he's the system. Like he embodies bureaucracy and the prosecutorial system, and he's a robot and humanless, and yeah, like I mean, to put people in prison for like many years for like an an intemperate Facebook statement. I mean, this is nuts. I mean, we've had before in previous years like people being arrested for praying outside abortion clinics. Also, women have been questioned by the police and had their thought checked, literally,
Mm,
for tweeting things like men can't be women, which are factually true. And like this is, the point at which people are being like arrested and harassed for making factually true statements because some people don't like them. I mean, the massive expansion of hate speech legislation, like where they're going to bring back, we have these unbelievably stupid things called non-crime hate incidents,
mm,
where they don't rise to the level of a crime, but people can be questioned for causing offense. An offense has been moved from like an objective to a subjective measure. So someone can say, well, I feel offended, and it doesn't even have to be you. You could say a hypothetical other might be offended by your factually true statement, right?
mm.
I mean, this is insane, right? So like this is kind of completely, I don't know where the rationalists are, because they should be really standing up for, the right to say that which the earth going around the sun.
Yeah, it is very curious where the rationalists are. Yeah, I mean, it's sounding downright Soviet at this point.
Absolutely.
In terms of, neighbors telling on each other,
Yeah.
reporting them to the authorities for,
Well, also COVID was like this. Also,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So
No,
it's
it's bad.
it's very
It's bad.
scary out there.
It is.
Um, how do you feel personally now that you've kind of been through the ringer a few times and are out of it? Are you hopeful? Have people reached out to you in support? Because one of the things that happens, and I was sort of coached on this by a friend of mine when I was uh, re-entering public life, was that I was considering being pseudonymous or being anonymous. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to have a public presence under my own name again. And one of the things he told me was, well, if you go and do things under your own name, and just tell the world like what you are, you keep your incentives aligned so that you're less likely to go really
Mm.
astray, as you might not if you're not careful, thinking you're protected by your anonymous or pseudonymous account. But the other thing is that the people who actually like what you have to say and believe in what you're doing will come and find you. Have you found support, compatriots, as a result of this? Has it helped you sort of sort out who your real friends are?
Oh yeah. I mean, I already had this in 2018, so I kind of know who my real friends are. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit boring to go through it again, honestly, but
Hmm.
I feel very spiritually strong, and actually I got a lot of support this time, much more so than in 2018. And I think it's because people are just much more familiar with these tactics and they can see them for what they are. And people don't want to live in this frightened authoritarian way, and they, like they can see it's nonsense, what is being said. And yeah, so I do get a lot of like public support, private support, offers of work, like anonymous support as well, and people who are like won't reveal their name to me but want to send their support.
Hmm.
um and yeah, people like want to talk to me often about their own inability to speak
They need
wherever
to
they work.
confess. They need to
They need
confess
to
to you.
confess. Yeah, so I've become like a confessor. um yeah, I mean, it's a like, yeah, paradoxically quite powerful position, I think, and maybe even enviable in some ways, because I think if you're living in constant fear of being cancelled, that's and then if you actually are, it's like you can't really be afraid of it anymore. It's like, so I think it's also like weirdly, perversely enviable for some people who are like, but what if I really said what I really thought at work and just like, blew it up. I
Hmm.
mean, it's interesting actually thinking about doxing, because so many of the big right wing, dissident right, whatever you want to say, figures did get doxed in the last year or so, but maybe a bit
Yeah.
longer. But like, BAP, Ren,
Lomez.
Lomez,
Hmm.
like I think Zero HP Lovecraft is the only person who isn't, maybe, I don't know, of the big, well, whatever, like
Yeah.
like well-read people. And actually it doesn't seem to have had a negative effect on any of their careers. If anything, they all weathered it really well. Like they were really just like cool about it. And it's like, yeah, like, oh, we're successful, funny, clever guys who lift. Like, oh, what are you gonna do? Like,
Yeah. Oh
you know
no.
oh no.
Um,
So I think the docs has maybe lost its power, or as a threat,
yeah.
at least to some people. But I think it's true. It's going to be the people who are not already established, because all of those guys could parlay their way into like a, they already kind of have a career and they have presence and supporters and so on. But I think it's, yeah, it's the vulnerable people who are like, who wouldn't have that. Like I'm like high profile enough in inverted commas to like not suffer necessarily too
Hmm.
badly. Like people will ask me to write, people have already asked me to write for them, and I've moved on quickly. It's not a problem.
But it might
Um
be a challenge for the average person. They might really have something to be afraid of.
yeah, and I think for the person who maybe has like a mid-level job, who, and especially I don't have a family, right? And that's a
Hmm.
deliberate decision that I made. And of course, if I had a family, if I had children, like this would be completely different. Like I wouldn't be able to put myself on the line and say truthful things in public or whatever. Or even just to defend people's right to make truthful statements, which is actually what I'm more interested in, is like it's I mean, of course we can talk about specific things, but it's more just I don't know, it's not even a right, like I think like a duty. Like people should be able to speak freely about difficult issues
Hmm.
in public, right? Like this is, how else are we ever going to understand anything?
Yeah. Do you regret any of your conduct throughout?
In my conduct. Um,
I'm not interrogating you for the
no,
police for
no, no,
offense.
no, no. I think the thing I'm still struggling with maybe is like, I find it difficult to psychologically to understand the psychology of people who refuse to talk to you.
Hmm.
Like people who want to say whatever they like about you, but who will not talk to you as if you're not human or not real. Or I find that really difficult. But that's not a regret of mine, other than to say perhaps I didn't understand the extent to which people could be like that, because I
Hmm.
just assume that baseline people are reasonable, and if you don't get on with someone, then you just don't have a relationship with them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You don't like,
You wouldn't have this very strange, nefarious, long-standing like agitation with someone at a distance and then actually refuse to ever communicate directly with them.
right. Like, what is that? Like, that's bizarre. Like, I'm not an object in
Hmm.
a fantasy.
Yeah.
It's like my life, you know, like, and not just me, many other people, and there's something kind of profoundly wrong and crazy about treating other people's lives and names in that way. Like,
Do you
I,
think it's a spiritual sickness?
I certainly think, I mean, I am a Christian and I became a Christian about 3 years ago. And one thing that I think I've come to appreciate it in the Christian understanding of what it means to be human is the the kind of brokenness that we all have and are, and that we are none of us pure beings. Like, we're not pure victims, we're not pure oppressors either. Like, we constantly, like, forgive it, our forgive us our trespasses, we forgive those who trespass against us. And the fact that we in the liturgy, you admit that we have erred, we have sinned, right? Either through thoughtlessness or through like weakness, or through malice,
Mm.
through our own deliberate fault. Like, that we are all capable all the time, and in fact we do all the time, like, make mistakes, we forget. Yeah. And I think that kind of constant reminder that you're not purely good or bad. I mean, all you can really do is just be slightly better,
Mm.
honestly. Like, but that's good. Like, that's great. But it kind of creates a sort of much more, I think, compassionate and open-hearted understanding of other people's mistakes as well, right? Like, there has to be a bit of social give and take and forgiveness, like the capacity to forgive, the capacity to admit when we have made an error, like when we have hurt somebody and they've hurt us or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that. And I think that's completely absent in the whatever came after Christianity, like the current culture, which
Mm.
is like has no forgiveness, no ambivalence, no ambiguity, no complexity of a model of the human. It's just good people, bad people. This is like very, very unhealthy.
What do they expect to do with all the bad people?
Well, I think they want to kill them.
Okay, yeah. Well, so I guess that's kind of the thing that's sort of the dark underbelly of all these individuals who are on this crusade against the bad people,
Yeah,
is that really they're murderous.
yeah. I mean, if I committed suicide as a result of their actions, they would be happy.
Yeah.
And that and
Um,
that is dark.
it is quite dark. Um, and I think it's just important that just from a humanistic perspective to sort of not let those forces triumph or feel that they've triumphed.
Yeah.
And even someone like yourself, I don't think you consider yourself a martyr for this cause, although you've
No.
certainly taken a lot of a lot of costs on your shoulders. But it it doesn't seem to have been dispiriting or caused you to become a recluse or anything that they would really hope for. So, and I think that's important that they don't get this kind of Pyrrhic victory out of it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I do have this spiritual strength, and I do know who my friends are, and I do know what I think, and but I'm also open to changing my mind and all of those things. And I also have weaknesses which I absolutely recognize. Like, I'm an alcoholic who can't drink, right? And I've behaved very stupidly in the past on the basis of being an alcoholic. But it's like recognizing your own fault and your own weakness is a strength, because then it's like you don't have to indulge it. Like, I'm not at the mercy of my own weakness in the
Mm,
same way, right? And I think also to refuse the mantle of victim. Like, I'm not a victim, and I think Christianity also very clearly tells you that you cannot take the place of the pure victim, right? Christ is the only pure victim, right? The only person who dies without sin as a scapegoat, as a victim. And we are all much more corrupted already. And so, but I think this is very clever, and this is, something that Girard talks about. It's like, you people who want to take the place of Christ, like, this is what victim culture is. It's people wanting to to take that position
Mm.
and be the pure victim. And this was in the case a lot. It's like, I'm the victim, he was saying. I'm the victim of this horrible campaign. I'm, a victim of this and that. And it's like, well, we're both all victims and perpetrators all the time. But none
Yes.
of us are pure, like, none of us are pure perpetrators either,
Mm.
actually. I mean, of course, we can have a conversation about evil. We can have a conversation about, whether redemption is truly possible for everybody, right? But that's at an extreme end. Like most of us are not at the extreme end, you know?
Yeah.
We are all in the middle. Like none of us are the worst and none of us are the best. And so I think paradoxically refusing to be a victim is, I mean, it's so much better not to fall into that trap, right? To not be a martyr, to not, to understand what one is able to give up, right? And to remain strong. Like it's good to know what your limits are, what your values are, and what you really care about.
Mm.
I care above all, apart from about certain people, I care about writing and thinking, right? I care that I'm able for as long as I can to do those things, right? That's what I care about.
Mm.
I don't care about status or money, whatever. I would like to have somewhere to live and food to eat, but it's not, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so you get an opportunity to find out what your values are. And that is a kind of spiritual exercise or trial, maybe, but a good one, very interesting one. Um, and I think it allows you to recognize these tactics more. Like, why is everybody pretending to be a victim? Like, this is a very bad situation.
Mm. What, uh, partially what I was, well, hmm. I have another question for you, just sort of about the concept of identity. You talked about the need for your support for pseudonymity and anonymity. Um, and I shared a little bit of my kind of thinking on this in the past. Um, what do you think it's healthy to partition your mind and your persona in that way? Um, or is it only acceptable in certain specific circumstances? Do you think that there should be like a time limit imposed? How do you think about this question of pseudonymity and anonymity and identity? Um, Obviously, for certain individuals, whistleblowers, etc., it might be
Mm.
necessary. I'm just wondering if your thoughts on that have changed or where you stand on that.
It's an interesting question. I mean, if you think about it from a literary and philosophical perspective, I mean, you have writers like Pessoa or Kierkegaard taking on these, poly pseudonymic characters, like having these multiple voices as characters or positions, within a system or an anti-system or a poetics, and so it's kind of an old thing in a way. And I I think it's probably what some people can bear. Like if someone can bear having a persona, I mean, like it'd be interesting to talk to somebody like Lomez or Ren who have had a long-term ego or character.
Hmm.
I mean, Bap is obviously a performance artist in many ways. Um, to see what that's like. I don't know because I'm not a very good actor, so I don't think I personally could have a persona in that way. Um, but I would respect people who kind of maybe can be schizoid about character, have different voices and not be driven mad by the
Yeah.
compartmentalization.
Hmm.
I'm sure it's possible. I would find it difficult, but I other people I think it might, yeah, it might be necessary and it might also be interesting, right?
Hmm. I
I,
certainly, I certainly think you and I agree that it should be allowed.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
of course.
and that's sort of like the big cudgel that's coming down right now is kind of the desire to de-anonymize everyone and everything.
Right.
Um,
But who wants that? I mean, who in whose uh favor or service or whatever, and whose benefit is that, right? It's not ours.
No, it's like the controllers of the system, who are kind of not even themselves real agents. They're kind of just servants of something. I don't even know what to say. Um,
Mm,
Intelligence agencies, probably, but others, vested interests that just kind of want to be able to control things. Um,
mm,
but it's sort of like I guess the institutions running the levers of the control society, perhaps.
yeah.
Um, but I personally find that at least for me, and maybe that's a psychological weakness on my part, but I find that it seems to be too disintegrating.
Mm.
I worry that I would get degraded or become something monstrous if I spent too much time dwelling in that kind of a thing. But perhaps others have pulled it off without too much trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have examples of where people seem to have not disintegrated, but I agree with you. I think, I mean, I had this like pseudonymous account, but it wasn't a character. Like it was just like a place where I put pictures and like followed, it was largely just to follow Manosphere. Okay. Like it wasn't a project in that way. But I mean, the question of masks and who we are is an interesting one. Like I did some acting classes recently, and it turns out that I'm a terrible actor. Of course I am, because I can't uh dissemble. So I react
Hmm.
uh how to put it, directly to everything that's happening rather than, I don't know, I can't have like a blank face. No, I don't mean blank face, like a neutral face.
Hmm.
Or whatever. Like it's actually very difficult. It's quite difficult to act. It's not, it's quite a talent. Who knew?
Yeah.
Um, and I think if one has like become a character, like, of course I've done so much speaking and teaching and of course it's a performance, but like I'm
Yeah.
performing myself, right? And in a sense I feel like I really am this person.
Hmm.
Like I do coincide with myself. Um, and I don't know if that's what Nietzsche meant by like become who you are. Maybe. I mean, and of course we put on airs or we act in ways in different situations, but I mean, I guess fundamentally I think, we have a soul. I mean, that it might be an interesting question to think about how when we're online, do we speak with our souls, or are we just entering into some like word vortex? I mean, this is one of the problems with the virtual words detached from bodies, because it's like people can say all kinds of things, right?
Hmm.
And there's no context, there's no body, there's no tone of voice, there's no speech. It's
Yeah.
just text.
Hmm. I know some people who feel like they can only be themselves under an anonymous account, not
Sure.
for any particular political reason, but just something about the mask, right, allows them to be their true self. And I think that's also an interesting um, apparent paradox. Um, it's sort of just the removal of self-consciousness, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess people earlier on in the internet would say like, oh, the internet is like the id. And then so like when people are saying what they really think under comments and I don't know, like comments under YouTube or whatever, like, and it's like things that they wouldn't be able to say to the person face to face, but they at a distance they can. But it's not necessarily nice, right? But maybe it's
Hmm.
cathartic.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking less combative, but
Hmm.
obviously there's lots of people that choose to use it for those reasons. Um, so we're gonna wrap this up here. I just wanted to ask you sort of, what things are you focusing on now? What are you interested in pursuing, talking about, thinking about in the future? I see you've been writing some poetry on your Substack. Everyone should go subscribe to ninapower.substack.com, by the way. Um, but I'm curious to see sort of where you're headed and what you want to be focused on in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few projects. I just finished teaching this course on iconoclasm, just like completely outside the academy. Like we do these kind of things just in a private space. And that was very interesting. So I'm trying to think about what iconoclasm means right now in terms of like when we have a flood of images, when we have an excess of images,
Mm,
is there a kind of iconoclasm within that, if you see what I mean? Like it's as well as the obvious destructive moments. So I've been looking at I guess like DEI
mm,
stuff without faces and the kind of pre-iconoclastic aesthetic of the DEI regime where
mm,
the removal of the face. Um, yeah, so thinking about like neo-iconoclasm, I guess I'm very interested in this question because images are like extremely powerful and the face is very, very powerful. And obviously we have entire religious, splits over this question within monotheism, but also within Christianity. And then again, in the French Revolution and the Chinese Cultural Revolution, you have these moments of iconoclasm which are extremely violent,
mm,
you know, the destruction of the previous regime, the destruction of art and architecture and so on. So I'm interested in this destructive urge, but how that manifests in an era of like the total excess of images, I guess.
mm. Oh,
Um,
okay. That's very
mm.
interesting. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, so iconoclasm and yeah, I mean I'm writing a few pieces here and there. Like I'm gonna review Jordan Peterson's new book
Mm,
when it comes out. Um and yeah, thinking in this space, I guess, around myth and religion and ritual, kind of Bataillean questions that I come back to, questions of
mm,
sacrifice. I'm very interested in the kind of deep anthropology and like theoanthropology, I guess, like behind what seem to be perennial human behaviors that are often disguised under political language, right? Like I think a lot of this is not about politics, you know.
mm. This is about unchanging human nature.
Yeah, yeah. And
Mm,
and this idea of an unchanging human nature or kind of perennial human nature is obviously like radically opposed to this kind of liberal fantasy that we can permanently reinvent ourselves or whatever. Like, no, we can't. We're exactly the same kind of people as we were like 2000 years ago. And this is why we can read poetry from that time, or we can read Plato and we can understand it. Do you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
of course, there are differences. Of course, there are new technologies. But we're like fundamentally, we still are these embodied people with souls. Um, yeah, and it's a total mistake to think that we can transform ourselves or get beyond that. Like we have to understand that first.
Yeah.
Um,
So understanding ourselves, to use a Petersonian phrase.
yeah, I
Um,
guess.
yeah, and well, thank you, Nina. This has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciated talking
Thank you,
to you
Alex.
again and having you on.
Always a
And
pleasure.
I wish you the best in all of your endeavors going forward.
Thank you, sir.